Resume tips. I actually used to teach resume and networking to veterans. One of my biggest tips is that it has to be in English. And I mean the everyday language that you are trying to get a job in. And I say this especially if you are coming from some kind of cult business beforehand, like, oh, the military, teaching, nursing, engineering, any of these things that have their own specific language. And even if you're going into another form of teaching, right? Like there might be language that isn't used. Understand what the internal language of your industry is, especially if you are crossing industry. And I'll use veterans as an example, right? There are always veterans that will put stuff on their resume in military language. And like, don't use the word execute if you're a veteran for fulfill operations, because that's not what civilians are thinking when soldiers say execute. Okay. And there are always soldiers that will say to me, they'll be like, but ma'am, this thing that I did in the military, there's no way to say it in civilianese. And I'll be like, well, then it doesn't need to be on your resume because then it's not relevant, right? If people can't understand what you did, then it's not relevant to the conversation. So that's just like, maybe that's not relevant to you, but I see it a lot in my business. Okay. Secondly, is understand that men will apply to jobs that they're only 20% qualified for because patriarchy, while women tend to only apply to jobs that they will hit if they're 80 or 100% qualified for. And so part of this, I think, is just not knowing how to brag about ourselves because we're not allowed to, right? And there used to be this thing I would tell veterans, and they would be like, I know I could do that job if I could just get into it. So then figure out how to tell in the story of your resume how you could do that job. And by the way, if you can't get paid for a certain position, a lot of times you can volunteer for it and then you can still put it on your resume, which of course means you were qualified to do it in the first place because you did it. Right. But one of the things I recommend if you're looking for a job, especially if you're a woman and you're trying to like work against this stuff is go on LinkedIn and read other people's descriptions of what they do, other people that are like you, right? So, for example, I one day on LinkedIn saw somebody else's tagline about themselves and they said international keynote speaker or acclaimed international keynote speaker. And I was like, okay, I like that. That sounds good. Can I say that about myself? I was like, I've done a TED Talk. That's an international platform. That was definitely a keynote. And that is definitely acclaimed. It is something I send out. People appreciate it. It has been, you know, said about me and part of my bio. Boom. As long as it's not a lie, you can steal other people's wording and put it on your resume. I come from the discipline of military intelligence where, like, there's no plagiarism. Like, that person doesn't own that phrase. They came up with it, they got it from somewhere else. If it's true for you, you can put it on there, right? And I've walked many officers through that now, going, oh, you want to be a speaker? Because, by the way, people that do public speaking make more money across industry than people who don't. I call this front of the mic advantage, front of the room advantage. Um, so veterans, a lot of officers want to be speakers, right? I'll be like, okay, have you spoken in uniform? Have you given a brief in front of a room? Yes, of course. Congratulations, you are a professional speaker. Have you done it in another country? Yes. Congratulations, you are a professional international speaker. Now just don't show up and suck if you get hired for that thing, right? But sort of this fake it till you make it can also apply to just not knowing how to say the thing that you're good at. You can get ideas from other people. There's not really plagiarism on titles of things that you do. And then finally, I would say networking. Networking is very, very important. Like it's not just the resume, it's also about who you talk to. And I think when you're trying to get a new job, there's two types of people you should be talking to. One of those is the people that are in that job right now. And they're the ones you ask all the questions about like what's the culture like? What do you like about your job? What do you not like about your job? What was surprising? All this kind of stuff. And then you want to talk to the person who's in that 20 roles that senior, 20 years that senior, right? If you imagine yourself 20 years from now, where do you want to be in this career? And go talk to that person. Do not ask that person for a job. ask that person for advice. And there's a very good quote that if you ask for a job, you'll get advice. And if you ask for advice, you'll get a job. So sometimes just by talking to those people or just by showing interest, I was once offered a very high paying job in Amazon security for uh, handling Brazil stuff. I couldn't take it because I had a toddler and a special operations deployed husband. Anyway, and I got that just by reaching out to the chief security officer of Amazon, who happened to be a veteran, and telling him that I was a veteran and I was getting into security and I wanted to chat. Right? So you just never really know. So I would say like part of having a good resume is also having the skills to network and to talk to people and to sell yourself. So practice that. Go to networking events if you can. I always say if you want someone to remark to you, wear something remarkable. This can also be true for resumes. Put something interesting on your resume that makes you stand out. I happen to be trilingual. Never have used it in like a job requirement other than this because I sometimes do videos in other languages, and I'm going to do soon an interview in Spanish, but like never really used it in my job. But it's always at the top of my resume, and it's always a topic of conversation when my resume is being looked at. And my bosses have always considered me to be an incredibly smart person because I dropped the trilingual thing on there. So, like, what can you put on your resume, on your appearance that's just a little bit interesting that will make them remember you? And that's my advice. I'm Daniela, scholar of cults, extreme groups, and extremely bad leadership. I wrote a book about growing up in the Children of God religious cult before going into the cult of the US Army. You can get signed copies attached here. Just coming back to say, like, don't be afraid to brag about yourself, especially for women. In America, we are taught we are not supposed to do this, but like being confident about the cool things you have done is important. Like, it just is. And the men are doing it, and the men are getting jobs based off of it. So, brag about yourself. Like, you're asking for a job, right? If you're on a job interview, you want the job. And I used to try to teach this to officers in the Army because they would be applying for school acceptance or for scholarships. And I was the one with the English degree. So they would come and ask me to read it. And every time I would be like, you're not bragging about yourself enough. The thesis of a personal statement to get into a program, a college program, a graduate program, or to get a scholarship is this is who I am. This is why I'm cool. Now give me your money or let me into your program, right? You don't need to spend a paragraph telling them how cool their program is. They know. You need to spend all your time talking about how cool you are and why they want to give you your money, their money. Have a day.